What is true thought and true feeling? Most most of what sort of gives us trouble as human beings takes place on the level of thought and feeling. In other words, there's quite a bit of illusion, Maya, distortion, whatever you want to call it, that takes place on the level of thought, on the level of feeling. And there's also what all that illusion, deception is covering up is a real freedom of expression on the level of thought and feeling. In other words, there's plenty of reality that can be experienced on the level of thought and feeling. And it's covered up. It gets covered up by all the illusory stuff that's there. In other words, there's an experience of, we could call it true thinking. And it's, difficult to describe because the language has to be paradoxical, of course. In terms of feeling, what does true thinking feel like? Well, it feels a little bit like being conscious and being unconscious at the same time. So we've pretty much all experienced insight. And insight is a thinking, we could say, that comes with a real kind of visceral feeling sense. So it's taking place on the level of thinking, but it's very much this kind of feeling. And if we have, a conscious thought, in other words, if we attempt to put our insight into language, that is fine, of course, and it might even be useful, but the insight itself doesn't really take place on that level. The insight is the experience of the insight. And the insight is always going to be sort of bigger, if you will, than any of the words we might use to describe it. And the value of the insight goes beyond the words we might put around that insight. So it's a thinking, it's happening on the level of thought, but it feels much more like a feeling, like an experience. And what I mean by conscious, unconscious, right? It's unconscious in the sense that it's not actually that important if we put an insight into words or not. The more and more time we spend living in this oh, it's getting difficult. Words. Let's see. Yeah, whether or not we have words or understand the thought, true thought, is actually not that important. The realization, the experiencing of it is what's actually important. Not whether we can wrap it up in words. The living of it, in other words, is more important. And so in that sense, it on the level of feeling, thought, on the level of thought, of feeling and experiencing thought, true thought feels a little bit unconscious. That's the feeling sense of it. And it's very fast. Conscious thought, where we're like slogging through the words, etc., really trying to figure something out. That's very, very slow, very slow process. Whereas true thought is lightning fast. Faster than snapping my fingers. And it's much more like an experiencing than the kind of thinking that we're used to. And on the level of feeling, there is also such a thing as true feeling. And this talk did not come at a very convenient time. I'm doing some chores around the kitchen. True feeling. What does that mean? That means that a lot of our feelings are generated. They're not really very true. A lot of our feelings are, generated by old wounds. They're generated by our beliefs. In a sense, they're reactions. And just in the same way that we've all had an experience of insight, we've all also experienced true feelings. What does a true feeling feel like? What sort of defines a true feeling? Sometimes it's intensity, which can define a true feeling, right? An anger that arises, has some kind of expression, and just burns through the system, and then it's done. It feels clean, doesn't linger in the system for hours, days. It's just a fire, a flash, and then it's done. Sadness. A really, really good sadness. A sadness that's like a response to an event. And it passes through the system without any clinging, holding on, resistance, dragging out. We weep, and then maybe it passes through so cleanly that then we cry. Or then we laugh, right? A sadness that's so intense, but also that passes through so cleanly that it's followed by joy. And it could be a fear, right? Probably not an abstract fear. Probably a fear that was experienced as a reaction to something real happening, right? Like we stepped out in the street and that car was hurtling towards us, and the fear comes into our system. Time slows down, everything's heightened, all our senses, and we just step backwards. There's no thinking about it. There's no freezing. No getting stuck. It's just a clean fear response, movement, and release. And we might, have some deep breaths afterwards. We might then have some kind of thoughts about it. Oh no, I could have been hit, whatever. But the fear itself just was clean. So, I'm talking a lot about clean. And I guess it's because I just don't have a better word for that. But it's... Yeah, when we experience true feeling, there's a sort of purity to it. We're not holding back. We're not the feeling typically doesn't linger. And as awakeness silence, true nature permeates our system more and more and more, we get to experience thought in this more and more and more clean way. We experience true thought, which is much more like feeling, much more like insight, much more a visceral, kinesthetic experience than what we're used to. Similarly, on the level of feeling, our feelings don't tend to last as long. We tend to experience more joy and also a kind of peacefulness, a kind of resting. And we're free to feel deeply, powerfully, fully, completely, when it's appropriate. We can feel angry in an uninhibited way. We can feel fear. We can feel sadness. And they tend to arise more quickly, more easily, and pass more quickly, more easily. Yeah. And, this is um, totally paradoxical. But oh well. Um, the the Enso returns to its beginning. The snake biting its tail. It's got a name. I'm just forgetting it at the moment. um, the Ouroboros, the serpent. Yeah, the Ouroboros, the serpent biting its tail. These are pointing to this experience on an experiential level, as in like what it feels like, what awakeness feels like, what it feels like to be human being and awakeness being a human being. This is the paradox that I started with, right? Is like, it's almost like being unconscious. The feeling, the experience is almost like being unconscious. Like I'm not particularly conscious of true thinking, right? True thinking just happens. And it's not something that I feel any desire to dissect. It's not something I have to think about for myself. It's not it's just this sort of feeling of like, oh yeah, I know that thinking realization, understanding is taking place. But I'm not particularly concerned about it, or even what it is. So in that sense, it feels like unconsciousness or semi-consciousness. Similarly, there's just not a lot of concern necessarily with feelings. Feelings will arise, change, be experienced. And so in all these senses, right, like awakeness resembles in some ways unconsciousness, even though there is consciousness here, clearly. So realizing consciousness is a bit like unconsciousness. And this paradox is what makes description really fucking difficult. And leads to so much stupid, sounding spiritual bullshit. Where did you go? Nowhere. What did you achieve? Nothing. What'd you gain? Not a damn thing. Right. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, on and on, right? What happened? Well, nothing happened. What did you do? I didn't do anything. And yeah, it is paradoxical. It is a paradox. And of course, it's also not exactly the same. Did you become extraordinary? No. Became very ordinary. Did you realize yourself? No, I realized no self. Yeah, the realization, um, the awakeness, is, it just is. And and we get to be um, very simply just ourselves. Ourselves with the tiniest addition, non addition of awakeness. Kind of a light heartedness. Why would I want that? Well, it's not really something one can want. Yeah. It's more just something we either need to realize or don't. Yeah, well, this talk straight away from talking about the level of thought and feeling. Oh well. Not my problem. uh, okay. Time for me to go to work. Um, yeah, blessings. Blessings on your insight. Blessings on your feeling. Blessings to your awakeness. Ciao for now.